I've lived through decades of joy, sorrow, love, and loss, but nothing prepared me for the horror that unfolded on that scorching day. My name is Olivia. I'm 79 years old, a widow living in Los Angeles, and I had been counting down the hours to meet my 9-month-old great-grandson for the first time. James, my grandson, was flying in from New York with his wife and their baby. It was supposed to be a day filled with love and laughter, but it turned into a living nightmare. Wildfires are common in California this time of year. The dry air, the unrelenting sun, and the faint scent of smoke drifting through the city. We're used to it. But this time it was different. The morning had started innocently enough. I had just finished baking cookies for James and his family. The walls of my modest home, which had stood as a fortress for my memories with my late husband John, felt warm and inviting. I called James to check on their travel plans. His voice crackled with excitement as he told me they'd be leaving in an hour. I laughed and teased him about bringing enough diapers for the baby. It was a normal conversation, filled with love and anticipation. Then, as I stood at the kitchen window, I saw it. A plume of black smoke curled into the sky, thick and menacing. It was distant, but unmistakably growing. My chest tightened, and a wave of unease washed over me. I hung up the phone, assuring James everything was fine. I told myself it was just another wildfire, far enough away not to be a threat. I had no idea how wrong I was. The minutes stretched into an eternity as the smoke thickened, blotting out the sun. The air grew heavy with ash, and an unnatural orange glow bathed the neighborhood. It was as if the world was holding its breath, teetering on the edge of disaster. Then came the sirens. Police cars and fire trucks raced down the street, their blaring horns a deafening reminder that this wasn't a drill. Panic set in as neighbors began fleeing their homes. I saw Mrs. Henderson, the elderly woman from across the street, struggling to carry her cat in one hand and a photo album in the other. Families shouted to each other, their voices drowned out by the roar of the approaching flames. I grabbed the essentials, a box of photographs, my purse, and a shawl John had given me on our 50th anniversary. My hands trembled as I tried to call James again. No answer. I left a frantic voicemail, begging him not to come, to stay safe. My heart pounded as I stepped outside. The heat was unbearable, like standing too close to an open oven. The fire was no longer just a distant threat. It was here. Trees ignited like torches, their crackling branches raining embers onto rooftops. The wind carried the flames with ruthless efficiency, jumping from house to house. I could feel the heat on my face, a terrifying reminder that time was running out. I'll never forget the sound, a deep guttural roar as the fire consumed everything in its path. Glass shattered, wood splintered, and the air was filled with the acrid stench of burning plastic and metal. It was chaos. People screamed, their cries blending with the relentless sirens. It felt like the end of the world. I stumbled back inside, desperate to save more of my memories. My legs felt like lead as I made my way to the living room. The wedding photo of John and me, the quilt my mother had made, the bookshelves filled. With decades of stories, it was all too much to leave behind. But as I reached for the photo album, a wall of heat hit me like a tidal wave. The flames were at my doorstep. "Olivia, you have to get out." It was Officer Daniels, a young policeman from the neighborhood. His face was streaked with soot, his eyes wide with urgency. He grabbed my arm and pulled me outside just as the front door ignited. I barely had time to register what was happening before he was shoving me into the backseat of a patrol car. The ride was a blur of red and orange, the fire dancing in the rear-view mirror. We joined a convoy of evacuees, the line of cars snaking through the smoky streets. Ash rained down like snow, coating everything in a fine gray powder. My throat burned, my lungs screamed for clean air, but there was none to be found. Hours passed before we reached the evacuation center. It was a scene of desperation and heartbreak. Families huddled together, their faces streaked with tears and soot. Children clung to their parents, their cries piercing the air. Volunteers handed out water and blankets, but there was no comfort to be found. I sat alone, clutching the shawl and my box of photographs. My house, my memories, my life with John. All of it was gone. I felt hollow, like a shell of the person I once was. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I had nothing left. The fire had taken everything. It wasn't until the next morning that I saw James. He had driven through, the night from Nevada, his face pale with worry. He held me tightly, his tears soaking into my hair. His wife stood behind him, cradling their baby, her eyes red and swollen. I wanted to feel relief, to find solace in their presence, but all I felt was numbness. Days turned into weeks, and the fire was finally contained. The news called it one of the worst wildfires in California's history. Dozens of lives lost, hundreds of homes destroyed. My neighborhood was reduced to ashes, a haunting wasteland of charred remains. The recovery effort was slow and painful. Insurance claims, temporary housing, government aid. It was a labyrinth of bureaucracy and despair. I moved in with James and his family in Nevada. They tried their best to make me feel welcome, to help me rebuild. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw the flames. I heard the screams. I smelled the acrid smoke. The nightmares were relentless, dragging me back to that day over and over again. The shawl was all I had left of John. I clung to it like a lifeline, the fabric still faintly carrying his scent. But even that comfort was fleeting. The fire had taken more than just my home. It had taken my sense of safety, my peace of mind, my very identity. Now, as I sit in this quiet room, staring at the box of photographs, I'm haunted by a single thought: how fragile everything is. A lifetime of memories gone in an instant. The fire may have been extinguished, but the scars it left behind will never heal. Every time I see a flicker of orange, every time I smell smoke, I'm back in that nightmare. This is my reality now, a life marked by fear and loss, a constant reminder of how quickly everything can be taken away. I'll never forget the fire, the horror, the helplessness. It's burned into my soul, a scar that will never fade. And so, I wait. For what? I'm not sure. The end, perhaps. Or maybe just a moment of peace. But until then, I'll carry this weight, this terror, this unshakable reminder of the fragility of life. This was my horror story, my true horror story, and it will haunt me until my final breath. Life had slowed down since I retired. The once bustling classroom where I'd spent decades teaching young minds had given way to quiet mornings in my little Santa Monica home. My name is Vera, and I've lived a life of love and loss. My husband, Robert, passed away 5 years ago, and my children are scattered across the country busy with their own lives. I found solace in routine, early walks, tending to my garden, and curling up with my cat Oliver in the evenings. But nothing could have prepared me for the day the fire came. It started as a normal morning. The sun was bright, the air crisp, with a faint sea breeze, and I'd just finished my tea. Oliver sat perched on the windowsill, his orange fur glowing in the sunlight. I had planned to spend the day sorting through old photo albums, organizing the memories of a life well lived. The world felt steady, unchanging. Then, around noon, the light shifted. It was subtle at first, a dimming that made me glance outside. The sky had turned an eerie shade of yellow, the sun obscured by a thickening haze. A faint, acrid smell wafted through the air. My chest tightened with unease. Wildfires were not uncommon in California, but this felt different, closer, more menacing. I turned on the news. The anchor's voice was tense, his urgent words sounding like a horror story. A fast-moving wildfire is spreading through the city of Santa Monica and much of California, driven by strong winds. Evacuations are underway. My heart sank. I hurried to the window and saw the plume of smoke rising over the hills, dark and towering. It was heading toward us. Panic set in as the realization hit. I had to leave. The minutes blurred into a frantic scramble, I grabbed an old duffel bag and began shoving in whatever I could think of, a few changes of clothes, my purse, a stack of letters Robert had written to me during our courtship. My hands trembled as I reached for the photo albums. Each one was a treasure chest of memories, birthdays, anniversaries, family vacations. There was no time to take them all. Oliver meowed loudly, sensing the tension. "It's okay, baby," I said, scooping him up and placing him in his carrier. His wide green eyes stared at me, unblinking. The smell of smoke grew stronger, seeping into the house like an unwelcome guest. Outside, the world had transformed into a scene from a nightmare. The sky was an apocalyptic orange, ash falling like snow. The heat was oppressive, the air thick, with the pungent stench of burning wood and vegetation. Sirens wailed in the distance, a cacophony of urgency and despair. Neighbors were fleeing, their cars packed with whatever they could salvage. Children cried, dogs barked, and shouts filled the air. I saw Mr. Carmichael from next door struggling to load his wife's wheelchair into their car. I ran over to help, my own fear momentarily eclipsed by the need to assist. "Thank you, Vera," he said, his voice cracking. "God help us all." I returned to my car, my heart pounding. Oliver's carrier sat on the passenger seat and the duffel bag was shoved in the back. I took one last look at my house, the home Robert and I had built together, where we had raised our children, celebrated milestones, and grieved losses. The thought of leaving it behind was unbearable, but there was no choice. The drive was a harrowing ordeal. Traffic crawled as evacuees clogged the roads, desperate to escape. Flames licked the edges of the highway, their relentless advance fueled by the wind. The heat seeped through the car windows and the air was thick with smoke. Oliver meowed plaintively, his distress mirroring my own. I kept one hand on the wheel and the other on his carrier, whispering soothing words that did little to calm either of us. At one point, the fire jumped the road ahead, a wall of flame erupting seemingly out of nowhere. Cars screeched to a halt, and for a moment, it felt like we were trapped. People screamed, some abandoning their vehicles and running on foot. I gripped the steering wheel, paralyzed by fear. Then, as if by some miracle, a fire truck barreled through, clearing a path. The line of cars moved again, inching forward through the hellscape. Hours later, I reached the evacuation center. It was a gymnasium filled with the displaced and the brokenhearted. Rows of cots lined the walls, and volunteers handed out water and blankets. I found a corner and sat down, clutching Oliver's carrier like a lifeline. Around me, people wept, their faces etched with the same disbelief and grief that I felt. The news trickled in slowly. The fire had consumed thousands of acres, destroying homes and lives in its path. My neighborhood was among the hardest hit. My house, my garden, the oak tree where Robert had proposed to me, all of it was gone. The realization was a punch to the gut, leaving me breathless. In the days that followed, I stayed with my daughter in San Diego. She tried her best to comfort me, but there was no solace to be found. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the flames. I heard the crackling of burning wood, the screams of the fleeing, the mournful howls of animals left behind. The smell of smoke lingered in my nostrils, a phantom reminder of the nightmare I had lived through. Oliver became my anchor. His quiet purring was a small comfort in the midst of my despair. I'd sit for hours, stroking his fur, trying to find some semblance of peace. But the scars ran deep. The fire had taken more than just my home. It had taken my sense of safety, my connection to the life I'd built with Robert. I've always believed in the resilience of the human spirit, but this tested me in ways I never thought possible. Rebuilding will be a long and painful journey, and the memories of that day will haunt me for the rest of my life. The fire may have burned itself out, but its impact lingers, a searing reminder of the fragility of life and the merciless power of nature. This is my story, my true horror story, a testament to the strength it takes to endure, and the scars that remain long after the flames have died. The inferno in Santa Monica may have destroyed my home, but it will not destroy me. It was supposed to be an ordinary morning. I remember the smell of coffee brewing in the kitchen, the faint hum of cartoons from the living room, where my 5-year-old son, Daniel, sat cross-legged on the floor. The sunlight pierced through the blinds, painting stripes on the walls. A normal day, until it wasn't. The first sign was the smell. Not the comforting aroma of coffee, but something acrid, sharp, and foreign. I brushed it off at first, thinking it might be the neighbors burning leaves again. But then came the sky. Through the window above the sink, I noticed the sun dimming behind a curtain of eerie orange. Smoke. My heart sank as I turned the radio on, my hands trembling. "Breaking news," the announcer said, his voice calm but urgent. "A wildfire has spread rapidly overnight, forcing evacuations across the northern outskirts of Los Angeles. Residents are urged to leave immediately if they're in the affected areas." The power flickered, and then it went out. "Mommy?" Daniel's voice was soft, barely audible over the rising wind. I turned to him, standing at the threshold of the kitchen clutching his stuffed bear, his blue eyes so wide and innocent locked onto mine. "It's okay, baby," I lied, kneeling to his level. "We're going on an adventure, okay? But we have to move quickly." I ran to the bedroom, grabbing the emergency backpack I kept under the bed. I'd prepared it after seeing news of last year's fires, but I never truly believed I'd need it. It wasn't enough, just some water bottles, granola bars, a flashlight, and a first aid kit. As I zipped it up, my gaze fell on the framed photos on the nightstand. Daniel as a newborn, his chubby face cradled in my hands. The photo of my late mother, her gentle smile frozen in time. I hesitated. Could I really leave everything behind? From the window, I saw the flames licking the horizon, closer than I thought possible. Ash was falling like macabre snow, staining the air with the smell of burning wood and destruction. I grabbed the photo frames and a box of keepsakes from the closet. But as I turned, Daniel's small voice shattered my frantic thoughts. "Mommy, I'm scared." I dropped everything. The box clattered to the floor, scattering its contents. Locks of Daniel's baby hair, birthday cards, my mother's old locket. None of it mattered anymore. "Come here, sweetheart," I said, pulling him into my arms. My voice shook, betraying the fear I tried so hard to mask. We bolted for the car. The heat was unbearable now, even through the thick walls of the house. Daniel clung to me as I threw the backpack onto the passenger seat and buckled him into his car seat. The road out of the neighborhood was chaos. Cars were lined up bumper to bumper, horns blaring as people panicked. The fire was relentless, roaring like a living beast as it devoured everything in its path. I drove as fast as I could, weaving around abandoned vehicles and debris. The smoke grew thicker, seeping into the car despite the closed windows. Daniel coughed, his tiny body shaking. "Stay low, honey," I told him, my voice cracking. "Cover your mouth with your shirt." The fire was everywhere now. Flames danced on either side of the road, their light casting grotesque shadows. I could feel the heat through the car doors, and my vision blurred from the tears streaming down my face. As we reached the outskirts of the evacuation zone, the road cleared slightly. I thought we were safe, but then I saw it. A massive tree engulfed in flames teetering precariously over the road ahead. I slammed on the brakes. "Stays here," I shouted, though Daniel's cries of protest tore at my heart. I jumped out, coughing as the smoke filled my lungs. My hands were slick with sweat as I searched the car for anything that could help. A blanket. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. I wrapped it around my arms and ran to the tree, trying to push it aside. It wouldn't budge. The fire crackled louder, its heat searing my skin. I looked back at Daniel, his tear-streaked face pressed against the window. "I'm coming," I screamed, though I wasn't sure if I believed it. With a surge of adrenaline, I managed to clear enough of the debris to squeeze the car through. I stumbled back into the driver's seat, my arms blistered and raw. "We're okay," I whispered, though I wasn't sure who I was trying to convince. Hours later, we sat in a crowded shelter, surrounded by other evacuees. I held Daniel close, rocking him gently as he slept. My skin was burned, my lungs ached, and every muscle in my body screamed in agony. But we were alive. Or were we? In the days that followed, the reality set in. The house was gone, reduced to ashes along with everything I'd left behind. The photos, the keepsakes, the memories. They were all gone. And yet, it wasn't the loss of material things that haunted me. It was the choice. Every night I replayed it in my mind. The moment I decided to drop the box of keepsakes. The way Daniel's voice had snapped me back to reality. What if I had hesitated a moment longer? What if I had tried to save more? The fire hadn't just taken my home. It had taken my sense of safety, my belief that I could protect my son from anything. Even now, months later, I can still smell the smoke. I hear the roar of the flames in my dreams, feel the suffocating heat. I see Daniel's face in the rearview mirror, his wide, terrified eyes begging me to save him. We're alive, but I'm not sure if I'll ever feel whole again. This is our horror story. A story of survival, yes, but also a story of loss. Because the real horror isn't the fire, it's the fear that it could happen again. The buzzing of my phone was relentless, a low hum that I'd learned to tune out over the years. Another fire warning. I glanced at the screen, reading the alert with a mix of annoyance and disbelief. Extreme fire risk in your area. Evacuate. Immediately. I sighed, tossing the phone onto the kitchen counter. It wasn't the first time I'd seen one of these warnings. Living in California, especially near the edge of the hills, meant constant alerts about wildfires, smoke, and evacuations. But nothing serious had ever reached us. Not once. Outside, the sky was painted in muted shades of orange and gray, the kind of eerie morning haze that had become unsettlingly normal during fire season. I had a shift at the hospital, and I couldn't afford to be late. Grabbing my bag, I threw a quick glance around the house. It was tidy for once. The framed photos on the mantel seemed to watch me as I moved, little snapshots of my life frozen, in time. My mother and me, smiling in front of the Golden Gate Bridge. My brother Lucas, holding up his college diploma. They felt like anchors, tethering me to this place, this home. But I brushed off the creeping unease that lingered at the edge of my thoughts. The fires wouldn't reach us. They never did. I stepped outside and locked the door behind me, pausing to take in the air. It smelled faintly of smoke, but that wasn't unusual either. The distant hills shimmered with an unsettling orange glow. It's far, I muttered to myself, sliding into the driver's seat of my car. I'm just overthinking it. The drive to the hospital was oddly quiet. The roads, usually busy at this hour, were nearly deserted. I told myself it was because it was early, that everyone else was still asleep. But deep down, I felt the first inkling of dread, a small seed that planted itself in my chest and began to grow. The hospital parking lot was emptier than usual, too. Inside, the air buzzed with tension. My co-workers moved quickly, their faces tight with worry. "Beatrice!" Maria, another nurse, hurried over to me as I clocked in. Her voice was breathless. "What are you doing here?" "What do you mean?" I asked, confused. "I'm scheduled for today." "Have you looked outside? The fires? Spreading fast. They're evacuating neighborhoods. You should go home." My stomach twisted. "I thought it was just another alert," I said, my voice faltering. Maria stared at me like I'd lost my mind. "It's not just an alert, B. It's bad. Real bad." I pulled out my phone and checked the latest update. The map showed the fire's progress and my heart sank. The evacuation zone now included my street. Oh my God. My voice was barely a whisper. "You should go," Maria urged. "Now, while you still can." I didn't need to be told. Twice. I grabbed my things and bolted for the car, my pulse pounding in my ears. The drive back was a nightmare. The smoke was thicker now, an oppressive blanket that turned the sun into a dull red orb. Ash rained down like snow, coating the windshield in a fine gray film. When I turned onto my street, I saw the flames. They weren't far-off streaks of orange on the horizon anymore. They were here. The fire roared like a living creature, devouring everything in its path. My neighbor's house was already engulfed, the roof collapsing in a shower of sparks. The heat was unbearable, even from inside the car. I slammed on the brakes and stumbled out, coughing as the acrid smoke clawed at my lungs. "No," I whispered, my voice trembling. "No, no, no." The flames were at my house now, licking at the walls like hungry tongues. I stood frozen, helpless, as the fire consumed it piece by piece. The roof caved in with a deafening crash, sending a plume of embers into the air. All I could do was watch. The memories flashed through my mind like a cruel slideshow. The nights spent curled up on the couch, binge-watching TV shows. The mornings drinking coffee by the window, listening to the birds. The photographs, the books, the little trinkets I'd collected over the years. Everything was gone. I thought of the warning I'd ignored, the alert I'd dismissed as just another exaggeration. The regret hit me like a punch to the gut, leaving me breathless. I should have listened. I should have packed a bag, grabbed what I could, and left. But now, it was too late. The heat forced me back into the car and I drove away, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the wheel. Tears blurred my vision, but I didn't care. There was nothing left to save. When I reached the evacuation center, I felt hollow. People were scattered around the large room, some crying, others staring blankly into space. I found a corner and sat down, clutching my knees to my chest. The guilt was unbearable. I replayed the morning over and over in my mind, each detail, sharper than the last, the way I'd shrugged off the alert, the way I'd locked the door and walked away oblivious to what was coming. The fire hadn't just taken my house. It had taken my peace, my sense of control, my belief that I could ever be safe again. Even now, weeks later, I can still see it. The flames, the destruction, the life I'd built, reduced to ash. And every time my phone buzzes with a new alert, I can't help but flinch, my heart racing with a fear I can't escape. The flame of fear. My name is Juliana. I'm 23 years old, a Brazilian who just over a year ago decided to take a leap and move to California to pursue my dream, studying photography. I've always been fascinated by capturing the essence of life through a lens, but I never imagined that one day I'd become the protagonist of something no one would ever want to capture. When I came here, I knew I was alone. My family stayed in Brazil, and although I had made a few friends at university, our bonds were still fragile. My house was in a remote area, almost rural, surrounded by dry hills and trees that seemed to beg for water. Wildfires were a common topic here, but in my naive optimism, I always thought the media exaggerated them. That day, the sky looked strange. A dull orange hue blanketed the horizon, as if the sun had lost its natural color. The smoke carried a pungent smell that stung my throat and eyes. It was hot, hotter than usual. On the news, they were talking about an uncontrollable wildfire, something unlike anything Californians had seen before. At first, I didn't think it would affect me directly. It's far away, I told myself. But when I went outside to check the mail, I noticed the wind carrying ashes. The once fresh breeze felt like a warm breath straight from hell. That's when I started hearing helicopters and evacuation alarms in the distance. Anxiety crept in, but I convinced myself I was safe. After all, my home was far from the usual evacuation zones. By nightfall, though, things took a turn for the worse. Emergency sirens blared incessantly, and an alert lit up my phone. Evacuate immediately. Wildfire approaching. Follow safe routes. My heart raced. I looked out the window and saw a reddish glow spreading across the horizon. The fire was coming. I began packing frantically, a backpack with clothes, my laptop, my camera, and a few photos of my family. It felt strange, but in moments like these, you realize that nothing you own matters as much as your life. I rushed to my car, but as I turned on the engine, the radio announced that the main highways were blocked. A suffocating sense of panic started to take hold. I decided to take the back roads, trying to escape. The smoke was so thick that I could barely see a few meters ahead. Every turn felt like the fire was closing in on me. Then I realized I was lost. Without noticing, I had driven onto a dirt road that led to a dead end. I got out of the car to try to orient myself, but the darkness combined with the smoke made it impossible to find my way back. And that's when I heard it. The crackling of trees being devoured by the fire. The flames looked alive, dancing and roaring like a hungry beast. My instincts told me to run, but where? I had no plan, only the overwhelming need to get away. The smoke scorched my lungs, and tears blurred my vision. Each step seemed to take me deeper into a labyrinth of despair. The sound of the fire grew, louder, and the heat became unbearable. My thoughts spiraled between fear and the desperate will to survive. Then I saw it, a small, abandoned cabin. It seemed like my only chance. I ran inside, shutting the door behind me, hoping the flames wouldn't reach me there. But the sense of safety didn't last long. The heat from outside began to penetrate the walls, and smoke seeped in through every crack. At that moment, I realized how vulnerable I was. Alone, in a place I barely knew, surrounded by something inescapable. Death was looming. But what terrified me most was the sense of abandonment, of insignificance against the fury of nature. Minutes stretched into hours. The cabin trembled with the heat, and the air grew thinner. I felt my body weakening, and I started to believe this was the end. But then I heard something, a distant noise, voices. It was a rescue team. With every ounce of strength I had left, I screamed, banged on the window trying to get their attention. After what felt like an eternity, I saw lights. A group of firefighters appeared, and for the first time, I felt a glimmer of hope. They carried me out of the cabin, wrapped me in a damp blanket, and took me to a safe zone. When I finally arrived at the shelter, I sat in silence, trying to process everything. I had survived, but something inside me had changed. The images of the fire still haunt me. I can't sleep without hearing the crackling flames, without smelling the smoke, even when I'm miles away from any wildfire. Life moved on, but I remain trapped in that day. Every time I close my eyes, I'm back on that lost road, feeling the suffocating heat, the terror. It's as if a part of me stayed there, consumed by the fire. And sometimes I wonder, did I truly escape? Or am I condemned to relive that nightmare forever? This is my horror story, a memory I never wanted but now defines who I am. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit that like button to help support the content you love. Your support means the world to us and helps keep the channel going. Don't forget to check out the video that's playing on your screen right now. There's more spine-chilling content waiting for you. Stay tuned for more stories, and if you haven't already, hit that notification bell so you never miss a new upload. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. Until then, stay safe and stay spooked.